If I could ask everyone to please take your seats, we want to stick to a rather tight schedule this morning. Good morning. My name is Gordon Flake. I'm the CEO of the Perth USAsia Centre. And in cooperation with the U.S. Consulate here and the U.S. Embassy, it is our great honor to be able to host a public address by United States Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland with opening remarks from the Ambassador herself, the United States Ambassador to Australia, Caroline Kennedy. As many of you know, in this very venue, the Perth USAsia Centre has over the last decade had the great opportunity of hosting ministers and prime ministers and admirals and generals, but I'm particularly excited about today. Many of you may know that I was actually born in New Mexico, the land of enchantment, raised in Arizona, and I spent the first 20 years of my life on the Navajo Nation. And so I just returned last night after 4 days in the United States, and all of my childhood friends and all of my family are particularly excited about the great honor we have of hosting Secretary Deb Haaland, the first ever First Nations Cabinet Secretary. I would also note that this is the first time in over a decade that we've had the honor of hosting a U.S. Cabinet Secretary here in Perth. The last time was in November of 2012, when then Ambassador Kim Beazley was here with Hillary Clinton, then Secretary of State, when they announced the creation of the Perth USAsia Centre. So we figure we want to continue to progress to make sure that's not every decade, but we're greatly honored to have Ambassador Kennedy and Secretary Haaland here today. Before we go any further, it is my great honor to introduce to you all Ingrid Cummings. Ingrid is a Whadjuk Noongar woman from Fremantle. She is the founder of Kart Kurt Wiern, a highly accomplished and award-winning young leader in the First Nations community. Many of you have heard from her before, but Ingrid has kindly agreed to deliver a welcome to country this morning. Ingrid.
Kaya maman, bao, yoga, yakolin kopper wearing jetting yerangang nunawa, jen cool kopper bujaye. To all the men, women and people here today, may I warmly welcome you to this beautiful place here along the Derbal Yerrigan here in Boorloo, to this beautiful land we like to call Whadjuk Noongar. Can I first acknowledge the absolute plethora of Noongar and Aboriginal leadership that is currently in this room. I will take my buka off that was given to me by elders in respect to you all, as I am certainly not the senior leader in this room. You are, and I want to be able to thank you so very much for the inspiration that you continue to give us younger generation of young leaders to carry on the amazing work that you've done before us. Thank you very much. To all the young First Nation leaders in the room, my allies, my family, may we continue to do the good work in honour of our old people. And to the Wodulars, our white fellow brothers and sisters in the room, may you hold our hands and walk with us as we go forward to that beautiful journey of reconciliation and truth-telling. So here in beautiful Boorloo, in beautiful Perth, along the beautiful river, good day for it, we gather here to celebrate a very special visitor and continue to talk about how we go forward together. So we don't discriminate here in our country. We like to think that everyone is murtang, is family, and we want to invite you to do ceremony with us, which is an important part of starting a very important gathering like this. So all you need to do is ma baraning ma. That's it. Oh, someone knows. My dad down there, my pop. To clap your hands, yeah? To create the beat, to bring those fellas here, those old people, to have a look at us, recognise us, and go with us on our future forward positive journey together. So if you're a DOCA supporter, we did a lot of that last year. Little dig. If you're an Eagle supporter, good luck this year. All right, so all right, so I'll give you the beat, $50 to anyone who can translate. Are you ready? Not you, Pop, because you know the language there. So. Maya maya ngan mutang, maya ngan buria, maya ngan kuninga, manju nichan yunga puja. Thank you for joining in. May the tingles you feel on your skin be recognised as those old people that are currently here with us. I always like to end when I do Whadjuk Noongar, Welcome to Country, with this. I have an incredible father by the name of Professor Len Collard. He's a Whadjuk Noongar man, one of my biggest inspirations. But I also have a Whadjuk mother. She's English and Russian, in the physical form of a black Russian. How good's that? And growing up in this country, we had these really strange laws where Whadjullers and Indigenous couldn't be together. But my mum and dad, they believed in their cartcourt wearing, their head, their heart and their spirit. So me standing here 39 years later is proof that when Indigenous and non-Indigenous people come together, beautiful things can be created, ladies and gentlemen. So in that spirit of reconciliation, honouring those Kora Yayo Buddha, those before us, here with us now, and the future leaders, may we all join in hands and walk together here on beautiful country. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid. When I first arrived in Perth almost 10 years ago, I was struck by the beauty of the welcome to the country, something I hadn't experienced. As evidence of how close and increasingly close the United States and Australia are, this is a trend that is growing in the United States, and those of you who may have watched the Super Bowl yesterday will have noted that for the first time ever, there was a formal welcome to country, including just some beautiful dances and welcomes done before the Super Bowl in the United States yesterday, and I think that's just a tremendous sense of progress. Let me, following that beautiful welcome, also acknowledge that we have many remarkable First Nation leaders with us here in the audience today. We have a young group of students in the audience today, and we particularly appreciate their presence. I should also acknowledge members of the Board of Directors of the Perth USAsia Centre, Kim Beazley, former Ambassador to the United States, former Governor, former Defence Minister, Opposition Leader, and more importantly, our current Chair is here, as well as Richard Court, former Ambassador to Japan, former Premier, Rebecca Tompkinson, who's with the CEO of the Chamber of Minerals and Industry and the Vice Chancellor of the University of Western Australia, Amit Chakma. I also should acknowledge His Excellency, the Honourable Chris Dawson, Governor of Western Australia, the Honourable Robert French, the Chancellor of the University of Western Australia, the Honourable Roger Cook, the Deputy Premier, and the Right Honourable Lord Mayor of Perth, Basil Zemplas. There are far many more that I should acknowledge, other Vice Chancellors, other Ministers, both past and present, current members of State Parliament, the Consul Generals, leaders in the state government, next generation leaders, etc. But I really should recognize all of you for rocking up at 7:30 in the morning to make sure that Perth continues to earn its well-deserved reputation as being a morning city. So we're delighted to have you all here. It's now my great honor to introduce someone that could fill this room on her own accord, and with whom we have been so delighted to collaborate in organizing this thing, and that is none other than Australia's ambassador to, the United States ambassador to Australia, Ambassador Caroline Kennedy. She really needs no introduction. When her appointment was announced, it was greeted with tremendous excitement in Australia. It was seen, rightfully so, as evidence of the importance of Australia to the United States. And obviously hers is a well-known name and a well-known story. However, in our community, in the Perth USAsia Centre community, in the foreign policy community, she was tremendously well received, not for her name, but for her tremendous experiences. Many of you may know that she served for 4 years as the United States ambassador to Japan from 2013 to 2017. She was there during those very important ceremonies to kind of mark the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II, really dealt with almost all the issues that she's dealing with today: alliance management, defense, security, trade, and investment. And so she came to Australia arguably the most experienced diplomat at high levels that we'd ever had. And so we're really fortunate to have her here. Prior to her, one other thing I should add about her time in Japan, the Japanese awarded her the highest ever honor given to a non-Japanese citizen, which is the Grand Cordon of the Order of the Rising Sun in November of 21. She had a wonderful long career as a lawyer, as an educational leader, and we in Australia are extremely fortunate to have her with us here. Without further ado, Ambassador Kennedy.
I don't know what further ado would look like after that, but thank you very much, Gordon. And, sorry. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, who have cared for this land for generations. And I want to thank especially Ingrid Cumming for that incredible welcome. Your song and story really reminds us of the importance of connection to country and to generations past, and that's something that I also carry with me every day. So it always means a lot to me how powerful that is here. I want to pay my respects to all the leaders, past, present, and emerging, and all the many Torres Strait Islanders and Aboriginal people that are here today. I have learned a great deal already from my time here with First Nations people who are so generous, sharing their wisdom and experience, and I hope to learn so much more. I want to thank the Perth USAsia Centre for having us here, and Professor Flake for that introduction. Maybe we can go everywhere together and you can introduce me. And thank you, Governor Dawson, for the welcome yesterday and the visit, and for your presence here today, the Vice Premier, Lord Mayor, and other distinguished guests. I'm so honored to serve here in Australia as President Biden's ambassador, not just because of our shared history, but because there's no more important alliance in the world today. This is my second trip to Perth, and I had such an amazing time here that I really was so happy when the Secretary decided to come visit, because you can really see the future from here. Western Australia plays a critical role in our security partnership. Just last week I visited HMAS Stirling Naval Base and the SAS at Campbell Barracks. Western Australia is also critical to our shared economic future. Together, we need to develop secure supply chains and critical minerals necessary for renewable energy. Our space scientists at Curtin University and NASA are collaborating on satellites and autonomous technology for the next generation of space exploration, and I saw ocean conservationists who are working with American colleagues together at UWA on nature-based solutions to build climate resilience. Our people-to-people ties have something for everyone. Just this past weekend, I met an American choreographer working with the Western Australian Ballet, UFC fighters here from Las Vegas, Dolly Parton devotees at the Fringe Festival, and I went to the Red Hot Chili Peppers concert here at the stadium. So in the past 6 months across Australia, I've seen firsthand the close partnership between our governments, the close friendships between our peoples, and a sense of common purpose as we take on the challenges of our time, most critically climate change. Under President Biden, the United States has embarked on the world's most ambitious plan to accelerate our transition to a green energy future. He's committed us to reduce our emissions by 50% over 2005 levels by 2030, launched the Global Methane Pledge, increased funding for adaptation and resilience globally, tackled super pollutants, committed to build 500,000 EV charging stations, and incentivized the purchase of electric vehicles. Australia is our partner in this effort. We are going to need to work together. There is huge opportunity, there are countless jobs, and we need to work together to create a healthier, cleaner world for our children and grandchildren. No one knows more about how to do this than communities who have been honoring and caring for the land for thousands of years. First Nations people in both our countries must be at the center of this effort. On my first weekend in Australia, I had the chance to meet Indigenous women at the Garma Festival in Arnhem Land, who explained how they care for country, moving between the ocean and the land with the skies as a guide. Last week in Fremantle, I met members of the Indigenous Desert Alliance who described traditional fire management practices and the larger role their members want to play in developing policy solutions. Though long overdue, this kind of knowledge and expertise is being recognized and integrated into government efforts in both our countries and is already having an impact. That's why it's such an honor to introduce a woman I greatly admire, a woman who has inspired all Americans with her leadership, her legislative skill, her life experience, and her commitment to justice for Indigenous people. Interior Department Secretary Deb Haaland comes from a family committed to public service. Her father was a decorated hero in the Vietnam War, and her mother worked for more than 20 years in Indian education in New Mexico. Deb grew up spending summers in the traditional cornfields, farming with her grandfather on the Laguna Pueblo. She was the state Democratic Party chair before becoming a congresswoman in 2019. Secretary Haaland is the first Indigenous person to serve in the U.S. cabinet. The Department of the Interior managed 200 million hectares of public lands, about 1/5 of the United States, with responsibility for energy management, drought and wildland fires, national parks, and wildlife refuges. The department also has a trust and treaty obligation to the 574 federally recognized American Indian and Alaska Native tribes, representing communities of 2.5 million people. It's no secret that over the course of our history, government policy towards Native Americans has been marked by betrayal, cruelty, and mismanagement. Now, Secretary Haaland is making it her priority to give Indigenous peoples a greater voice, greater visibility, and greater power. As both the United States and Australia seek reconciliation from a history of injustice towards First Nations peoples, we are fortunate to have Secretary Haaland to lead us forward. It's my honor to introduce her now. Please welcome Deb Haaland.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Ambassador Kennedy. Thank you, Ingrid, for that beautiful welcoming, and Gordon for everything. The son of a teacher is so wonderful when people choose to teach in Indian country, because it's not always easy, but thank you for your service. Thank you to Ambassador Kennedy for that kind introduction, and thank you to the Perth USAsia Centre for hosting today's discussion that is so important for Australia, the United States, and the entire planet. Hello, everyone. It is such an honor to be here with you today, and thank you to those who are joining us online. Before I begin, I would like to join Ambassador Kennedy in acknowledging the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation as the traditional custodians of the land we stand on. Guwatsi haupa, duhiname etzatuitsa shuimi hanu. My name is Deb Haaland, and I serve as the 54th Secretary of the United States Department of the Interior under President Joe Biden. I am so proud to be here in Western Australia as the first Cabinet Secretary to visit in over a decade. We all have lived experiences that we bring into this work. For me, some core perspectives are that I nurtured my child as a single mom. I'm a public servant, a marathon runner, and I was raised in a military family. My dad was a third generation Norwegian American, and my mother's family can trace its heritage back 35 generations in the United States state of New Mexico. I'm a proud member of the Pueblo of Laguna, an indigenous community that has called the Southwest United States home for millennia. I am so thrilled to be here in Perth and visiting this beautiful country. Like many indigenous communities around the world, much of my identity reflects the land my people come from. Over millennia, my ancestors used traditional knowledge and practices that were passed down through generations of people who learned to survive and thrive in the high desert landscape. They migrated to the Rio Grande Valley in the late 1200s, which makes my 35th generation distinction a proud part of my biography. My ancestors used their knowledge to manage and escape drought, to feed their families, to care for the earth, and to coexist with the land, water, and wildlife that sustain them. I think it's fair to say that even to this day, no one knows my homelands better than its original stewards and their descendants. As a child, I was lucky to have some of this wisdom shared with me. Living in Mesita, our small village on the Pueblo of Laguna, I spent many days with my grandfather as we tended our cornfield. While we hoed weeds and picked worms off of each ear of corn, he would tell me the history and stories of the land. He taught me how the rain and snow that coated the mountains fed our river, which fed our cornfield, and in turn fed us. In that cornfield, he taught me how our actions are connected to the land, and the land to every single person. Like my grandfather, my dad made sure my siblings and I experienced nature as much as possible. Whether it was a hike through a rolling mountain range or a walk across a sandy beach, I constantly saw the beauty of this earth and the countless reasons why we must protect it. These lessons continue to inform the work I do at the department. They taught me that our relationship with nature must be reciprocal, and that the land and its offerings are gifts that we must never take for granted. As Secretary of the Interior, I lead the federal agency tasked with, in many ways, stewarding the United States' direct relationship with the earth. The department oversees 480 million acres of U.S. public lands, which is over 2/3 the size of Western Australia. Along with federal waters, the department oversees the energy development, conservation, and wildlife management policies that impact these vast and irreplaceable spaces. Additionally, we uphold what we refer to as the federal government's nation-to-nation relationship and treaty responsibilities with 574 sovereign tribal nations, the equivalent of First Nations here in Australia. At one point in time, the department I now lead was tasked with either exterminating or assimilating Indigenous people like me, a painful history that our two countries intimately share. I am the first cabinet secretary who brings the trauma of surviving federal assimilation policies to the decision-making table. As secretary, I stand on the shoulder of those who came before me, who survived those painful pages of our history so that I could be here today. With so much responsibility for the health and well-being of the land and people, our department is well positioned to help address the greatest challenge of our lifetime, the climate crisis. But to do that, we must work across the globe to find collaborative solutions. Intensifying wildfires, historic droughts, disastrous flooding, and disappearing wildlife threaten the futures and national security of every country on Earth. Our countries are both experiencing the devastating impacts of a rapidly changing climate and have already created a model of collaboration to meet that challenge head-on. The United States assisted during the Black Summer bushfires of 2019 and 2020 by sharing wildland fires to stop the blaze, just as Australia did for our 2018 fire season. 13 times in our history, our countries have come together to help each other fight these fires. We owe a great debt to those who put their lives on the line and those who give the ultimate sacrifice to protect our communities. Today, both our countries are experiencing or bracing for yet another season of devastating wildfires. We cannot deny that this is the new reality. Climate change is impacting us all, and it will require all of us using every tool we have to address it. This means creating and strengthening partnerships to meet the moment together. Thankfully, our countries can be a model for international partnerships around the world. Our collaboration literally spans decades. Our governments are working together to secure essential components of our clean energy future, from critical mineral data and mapping to offshore wind, that will strengthen important supply chains and support good-paying jobs. We're advancing the breakthrough industries like offshore wind development through scientific knowledge sharing that is informing essential regulatory frameworks. As we address drought and water management concerns, we benefit from sharing experiences and information on many issues, from improving dam safety and drought resilience to assessing river basin supply. we can bolster our resilience to the impacts of the climate crisis. Since entering office, President Biden has unleashed an historic all-of-government approach to building a clean energy future, uprooting and addressing environmental injustices, and responsibly conserving the lands and waters that sustain us. We're doing this while ensuring marginalized and historically forgotten communities benefit from this effort. Many countries have established goals to address the climate crisis. And we should all give Australia a hand for your passage of the 2022 climate change bill that outlines greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets of 43% from 2005 levels by 2030 and net zero by 2050. Excellent job. President Biden has also put forward an ambitious contribution under the Paris Agreement to reduce net greenhouse gas emissions between 50 and 52% below 2005 levels by 2030. We know that nature is our ally in the fight against climate change, and that's why we're investing in the restoration and conservation of our public lands and waters to help meet our climate goals. In the United States, we have centered this work in an initiative called America the Beautiful, a decade-long challenge to conserve, connect, and restore 30% of our lands and waters by 2030 through voluntary and locally led conservation. To help meet this goal, the United States is leveraging an essential, globally underutilized tool to address our interlocking climate and biodiversity crises: Indigenous-led conservation and co-stewardship partnerships. I'm here to tell you that not only is this work possible, it is necessary. And it's already happening across the United States alongside dozens of sovereign tribal nations. Through Indigenous-led conservation and co-stewardship initiatives, the United States is creating opportunities for the original stewards of our country's lands and waters to participate in how those lands and waters are managed. What is critical here is that we're putting words into action. And the exciting part is that much of what we are doing can be replicated for a more equitable and climate-resilient future worldwide. Last year, we announced the reacquisition of 465 acres, or almost 190 hectares, at Phones Cliff, a sacred site on the East Coast in Virginia, to the Rappahannock tribe. I had the honor of celebrating this acquisition with Chief Ann Richardson, the tribe's leader, as we explored their ancestral homelands. As we took a riverboat tour together, the chief explained to me the importance of this land to the tribe, which was one of the first human encounters to European colonizers. While eagles soared overhead, she described how meaningful it would be for the tribe to share their Indigenous knowledge and storied history with our country. Her words were a testament to just how impactful our conservation work is for present and future generations. Through the agreement, the tribe will draw on its Indigenous knowledge and practices to better manage the area's habitat, which is a globally significant nesting location for resident and migratory bald eagles. The tribe also plans to expand its river education program, which conveys traditional river knowledge and practices to young people and their surrounding communities. The results of this transformative approach to conservation are already being felt, and each of us stands to benefit. As many of you know, the United States holds a vast network of public lands and waters. Conserving these iconic landscapes and their inherent ecological benefits is essential to reaching our climate goals. For centuries, tribes have been excluded from the management of the ancestral homelands they were removed from. Together, we are changing this reality. The Biden-Harris administration celebrated a historic co-management agreement between the Department of the Interior and the 5 tribes of the Bears Ears National Monument. The monument is a culturally rich and recreationally diverse region comprising nearly 1.4 million acres, over 550,000 hectares, that draws hundreds of thousands of visitors every year. The 5 southwestern tribes, the Hopi Pueblo, the Navajo Nation, the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe, the Ute Indian Tribe of the Uinta and Ouray Reservation, and the Pueblo of Zuni, each have cultural and ancestral connections to the monument's iconic buttes and the thousands of sacred sites that dot the landscape. Through this historic agreement, the tribes will participate in and apply their indigenous knowledge to the long-term management of the monument, which has suffered natural and human-caused damage from drought, erosion, looting, and high visitation rates. When I visited this sacred site on my first trip as secretary, I could feel the power of the earth beneath our feet. It was clear that this was a place we must protect, and that the tribes whose ancestors built intricately laid stone homes on the sides of cliffs, harvested the land, and lived their best lives according to the seasons must participate in this work. These tribes now have a path to apply the knowledge and conservation strategies that they developed over generations. This irreplaceable guidance will benefit us all. Centering Indigenous knowledge also means empowering Indigenous communities, supporting their subsistence lifestyles, and honoring the trust responsibility the federal government has to sovereign tribal nations. In June of last year, the department announced the successful transfer of fish production and staffing at Dorshak National Fish Hatchery to the Nez Perce tribe in the state of Idaho. Since 2005, the hatchery has been jointly managed by the department and the tribe. Each year, it produces millions of steelhead, spring chinook, and coho salmon, fish that are culturally significant to many tribes. When I visited the hatchery to celebrate this transfer, I saw its importance to the Nez Perce people, whose ancestors maintained fishing villages and harvesting traditions that honored the cycles of the fish and the Clearwater River. Witnessing this historic transfer was something necessary and pure. Through the full management of the hatchery, the tribe will nurture and cultivate the fish that have sustained their people with knowledge incurred over millennia. This knowledge is integral to our country as the tribe and surrounding communities adapt to the growing impact of drought across the United States. These agreements are among 20 that have so far been signed during the Biden-Harris administration, and we have 60 more that we're working on. But the United States is not acting alone. Australia is also making important headway toward this shared goal. Just as my ancestors cared for their lands, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have cared for the lands that sustains communities across this country. Here in Australia, members of the Queensland Indigenous Women's Ranger Network are leveraging Indigenous knowledge gained over tens of thousands of years to protect iconic and threatened ecosystems like the Great Barrier Reef. By merging Indigenous knowledge of the environment with modern tools like drones, the Indigenous Rangers take a holistic approach to protecting the reef by monitoring coral change, forest fires, and land degradation that threatens imperiled species. Last year, these traditional custodians were awarded the 2022 Earthshot Prize for their work to protect this culturally and spiritually significant region. This prestigious award is recognized across the globe. This global recognition will allow Indigenous women rangers to expand the possibilities for conservation work everywhere. As I often say, there is much to be gained when we respect and integrate Indigenous knowledge into our collaborative conservation initiatives. Many of the challenges we face today, a warming planet, the loss of habitat and wildlife, dying coral reefs, these could have been lessened or completely avoided if early colonists had valued the stewardship practices and environmental wisdom that tribes had cultivated over thousands of years. As secretary, I had the distinct honor to travel to and visit Indigenous communities across the United States who maintain their inherent connection to the land, a connection intrinsic to their cultures, languages, and ways of life. The tribes of the Pacific Northwest of the United States, for example, view the salmon, whales, birds, and bears as their own relations. These people were the sea bearers and navigators of this region long before colonizers ever set foot on our continent. When you are of the land and the creatures that depend on it, you tend to it with future generations in mind. If we feed and nurture the land, in return, it will take care of us. This is a lesson the entire world can and must benefit from if we want to save this planet for our grandchildren. Now, there are as many cultures as there are tribes. We each celebrate life in different ways. Our belief systems, practices, and traditions differ from one another. And the challenges we face as a planet are vast and varied, and we all have something to contribute. Our solutions should be informed by thousands of years of observation, interaction, and intimate understanding of our planet's natural systems. By centering Indigenous-led conservation, we can leverage the diversified and locally informed knowledge of the communities who have always stewarded the land and the waters we all depend on. But using Indigenous knowledge cannot happen in a vacuum. It requires a fundamental shift in how Indigenous communities are treated and how the tragic errors of our nation's past are remedied. This work requires all of us. It requires that every country and leader learn from and build off the progress of others toward our shared goal. It requires listening and learning. It requires action. The future of our children, the future that our children deserve, is not out of reach, but we must act quickly to save it, and we must do it together. Thank you so much to Ambassador Kennedy, to the Perth USAsia Centre, and to each of you for being here today. I think we're going to do a few things, and then we'll turn to the Q&A portion of today's event. Thank you very much. Dawa.
Thank you so much, Secretary Haaland. You've moved me. We are honored today to be able to present to you a gift from Noongar Whadjuk country. I'd like to introduce Madison Byron, who's a Whadjuk Noongar woman from Perth. She grew up here and in down south as well. She's currently a student of medicine at the University of Western Australia. And Madison will present Secretary Haaland with a message stick. She's also an artist in her own right. Message sticks traditionally are passed between visitors to communicate within country. This particular message stick represents the 6 seasons of the Noongar seasons here in Perth. We're actually in second summer right now. So without further ado, Madison, would you please present that to the Secretary? Thank you, Madison. And Secretary, I'll take that from you. We'll put that right here for now. And I'll ask you to sit down there in the middle if you would kindly. And I'll ask Ambassador Kennedy to come join me up here on the stage. We're not entirely inhospitable. Now we're going to have a question and answer time. So all of you will have a chance to eat. Now you've been very patient in terms of the process, except for we're not overly hospitable to our guests. We're going to work during the course of breakfast. So Ambassador Kennedy, if I could get you to join me on the far side there. Many of you were kind enough to submit questions in advance. We ourselves had a lot. We have a lot of content to go over from both Ambassador Kennedy's remarks and Secretary Haaland's remarks. But it's my great honor to kind of just engage in a little bit more of an in-depth conversation and hopefully tease out some of the content in the speech and the issues that will be of keen interest to our community here in Western Australia. Secretary Haaland, you concluded with a clarion call for us to listen, to learn, and then to act. Mm-hmm. And your entire speech was replete with examples of where you have been doing that in your current position as Secretary of the Interior. I wonder if you might give us 2 or 3 kind of specific experiences that you've had where you have been consulting with Native communities with the intent to learn from their long experience, and that has led to some action.
Yes, absolutely. Well, of course, first I'll say that this climate crisis, we're a global community now, right? And so the climate crisis is affecting everyone worldwide, across the globe. So it's up to all of us to act, to do something about it. In the United States, of course, we're so proud of President Biden's leadership. He made tribal consultation a priority of his administration. So all of us, it's an all-of-government approach. We're all required to consult with tribes on issues of importance to them and issues that matter to them. So naturally, because we manage the nation's public lands, that was all Indian country at one time. That was all indigenous land at one time. So it is important that we are consulting with those tribes whenever decisions are being made. I mentioned to you that Bears Ears National Monument and the Dorshak Fish Hatchery are two iconic places that we have consulted with tribes, and that they are now leading the efforts on how to manage those lands. We also were able to give the National Bison Range. There's a National Bison Range that we conveyed to the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes so that they can now manage the National Bison Range. It's just incumbent on us to make sure that we're consulting. You don't know what tribes are thinking unless you talk to them, unless you bring them to the table and have a conversation. And sometimes those conversations might go on for years. They might go on for a few months. It matters. Some of our northern tribes in Alaska, are facing the impacts of climate change more heavily than tribes in other areas. Subsistence tribes that rely on salmon and other animals to live from year to year, they are facing a lot of challenges because of climate change and because we're not working together. So making sure that we're having those conversations, having actual consultation with tribes about subsistence only, hearing what solutions they offer, and then acting on those. So I think that will absolutely be ongoing, and we're proud to have those conversations every time we have them.
Well, let me extend my personal thanks for the tremendous leadership you showed on the Bears Ears Monument. As I mentioned in the introduction, I spent the first 20 years of my life on the Navajo Nation. And you would think that living here in Perth, as far away as we are, and then 25 years in Washington, I'd be cut off from that. We spend every day bemoaning the horrible things about social media, but there's some good things. And the good things is for the last 20 years, I've been more plugged into Navajo politics and weather and sports and obviously here in Perth than I ever was when I lived there as a child. Yeah. And that's just because there's so much more of a community, and a good part of that has been working for a long time to see the preservation of that monument. So thank you for your leadership there. I did mention that you are now in the farthest city on the planet on land away from Washington, D.C. So in your international consultations, you can say that you've gone to the entire span of the globe. You can't get further away. Yeah. But I wonder if I might turn that first question back to what Australia in particular and the United States might be doing together to kind of advance the priorities that you set out. I'll start with you, Secretary.
Oh, sure. Well, of course, thanks for the example. Yes, reaching out to the farthest point away from the United States. I've been to a lot of farthest points. When I went to Alaska, I was the northernmost point of the United States in the village of Uktiagvik in Alaska. And now I'm way down here. So I guess you could say that all those conversations certainly are affecting the way we do business. But I'm so proud of the work that Australia is doing. And I mean, look, I mentioned in my remarks that we're coming together on fighting wildfires, for example. Making sure that those adaptive efforts are moving forward. and working together to do the things that we need to. So I think that the US and Australia have an excellent partnership. We're happy that with respect to Indigenous issues that we're also moving along. You know, when I flew in to both Sydney and Perth, the flight attendants gave a land acknowledgement when we landed at the airport. That was very impressive to me. That means that that collaboration is on the top, you know, the top of mind of everyone here. So I think with that being said, we're going to work together to make sure that we can move forward. It's about the future generations, and I see that here as well as in the United States.
Thank you. Ambassador Kennedy, if I could pull you into the conversation. This is your second visit to Perth, and I've been following you closely on social media, and you've been everywhere.
Wow, do you do anything but go on social media?
I've had long plane rides where plane rides used to be, you know, a place where you could retreat from the world, but no longer. There's Wi-Fi at every flight, and so I had to know that you were at Austell shipping in the shipyards, and you had great visits to, including I didn't catch the Red Hot Chili Peppers concert, which is impressive, but I did catch one thing you said in your opening remarks, and you said it about Western Australia, that you can see the future from here. And obviously that's something that we believe ourselves, given industry and stuff like that. But I was curious as to, given the tremendous work that you've done on Australia-US relationships more broadly, in the priorities that you're pursuing out of Canberra, the particular role that you see for WA, priorities for us as a community here in supporting your agenda.
Well, I think just keeping with the theme from today, obviously, climate change is a huge priority for both the Biden-Harris administration and the Albanese government. And certainly, so many of the solutions to this crisis and so many of the technologies that will allow us to transition to a green energy economy are being developed here. I mean, Australia, you know, back in Sydney invented the solar panel many years ago, but here now we are exploring critical minerals together. Those are absolutely essential for wind turbines, for the batteries, for all of that. And no place has more sophisticated or more ESG higher standards for mining those. And so that is one huge effort. The incorporation of Indigenous practices is another area where I think this state is leading. There's a real effort to learn. As I mentioned, I met the members of the Indigenous Desert Alliance last week who are eager to participate in policy making in a more active way. So some of these efforts are well developed, some of them are kind of coming up, and the most important thing I think is that students here are taking this on, just as they are in the United States. So we need students to pursue the scientific and technological disciplines that are going to be involved in this transformation. There's a huge amount of opportunity. Western Australia already leads, and obviously in mining and resource development, but there's so much more that's going to be needed, and that's a huge opportunity for both our countries under the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Act that Secretary Haaland is largely responsible for implementing. We are looking to develop these resources with trusted partners, and we have no more trusted partner than Australia. So it really goes across the board, and in that area, and then of course we work together in our security partnership as well, and this area is going to be critical to that. I was fortunate to visit some of the military personnel last week, and who are just working with American counterparts just closely, have been for many years, and I think that kind of partnership and dialogue really keeps us all safe.
Thank you. I appreciate your focus on critical materials. Many in the audience will recall that last October, the Japanese Prime Minister Kishida Fumio visited Western Australia. We, at the time, made the observation that when his predecessor, one of his predecessors, Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, visited Perth in 2014, Perth was just a venue. They stopped here briefly, then went off to a mine site to focus on the continuing importance of iron ore. But for Prime Minister Kishida, Perth was the destination. And it really was because of critical materials, rare earths in particular, lithium, solar, hydrogen. And one of the conclusions that the Japanese ambassador at the time, your counterpart in Canberra, Yamagami Shingo, said, he says that Perth is the geostrategic nexus of the Indo-Pacific and the economic nexus of Australia-Japan relations. But a large part of that really is those issues that you focus, critical materials. Secretary Haaland, rare earths, critical materials in general, these are future-oriented industries, but they're largely on lands where the Department of Interior has a really important role to play. And given your purview over, I think 1/5 of the United States, right? How do you balance the industrial, mining, material needs of the future with the indigenous communities and the knowledge in that process, particularly around critical materials?
Right. So for our part, of course, it's balancing that against indigenous, connection to the land, but also protecting critical habitats for animals and plants and those ecosystems that keep us all alive. So we understand how important critical minerals are to our future. If we want to transition to a clean energy future, we have to make sure that we have the critical minerals to make that happen. And so I think with moving that issue forward, it's also balancing the need for that against the need for us to have a sustainable future, right? There are places to mine and there are places not to mine. In the United States, we pride ourselves very much on protecting workers and making sure that worker safety and all of these issues are also taken care of. So those are the conversations that I talked about that need to happen, right? You don't rush into something, drill now, think later. It's making these decisions very carefully, making sure that we are taking into consideration those indigenous connections to the land, but also protecting our habitats because we're nothing without nature. We're nothing without our animals. We're nothing without our plants. We're nothing without these ecosystems that keep us alive. So we feel very confident about the work that we're doing. I oversee the United States Geological Survey. It's a vast group of scientists who study these things. They know where these minerals are. They know, they know how to measure things in the soils and the air and the water. So it's relying on the scientific data and making sure that we're plotting forward in a very thoughtful and database way. Taking all those things into consideration is how we get to the future with clean energy.
Well, thank you. Ambassador Kenya, you referenced the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States. That may not have been a popular phrase. We don't focus on the individual things, but it's had a really big impact on critical materials. I was in California for the last 4 days at a Sunnylands dialogue on the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, and a heavy part of that focus was on the implications of this Inflation Reduction Act, which provides hundreds of billions of dollars in support for developing clean energy technology in the United States, but in particular with trusted allies like Australia, with which the United States has a free trade agreement. I'm wondering if you might want to address the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act and how it's pushing on Australia-US cooperation.
Well, I think, as you mentioned, there's $750 billion which will be incentivizing the development of these new technologies and partnerships, and certainly to transition to the green energy economy. And it's really placed the United States back in the lead in terms of leading this transformation and encouraging others to join. It's a U.S. effort, but I think it provides great opportunity for Australian and US companies to work together in partnership both here and in the United States to develop these technologies, to produce these minerals, but also it's a global effort. It provides incentives for climate adaptation in this region, in the Pacific, by providing incentives to do things like that. So I think that the United States under President Biden is really obviously trying to, as the Secretary says, support American workers, develop new industries, and work with partners and allies to do that, because that's really our greatest strength, are the relationships that we have. And there really isn't a closer or more critical one than Australia right now. So this region in particular will benefit enormously from that. I met yesterday with a number of people who work in the mining industry who are eager to develop facilities here, also in the US, work together. There will be, I think this will really jumpstart a lot of those efforts, which are, we've known that we should do for a long time. We've been eager to do it, but now we have a real incentive to speed it up. And so I think that that's going to be transformational, and no place is going to benefit more than Western Australia.
Thank you.
Let me say that one more time.
No place will benefit more than Western Australia. That's already in my tweet. It's going to go out immediately. Ambassador Kennedy, in your first few weeks in the country as ambassador, you really caught a lot of people's imagination. Number one, with your visit up to the Solomon Islands in the commemoration around the events surrounding your father, PT 109. But this other thing you did that probably didn't get as much attention, but was very, very significant, I think, to the issue we're discussing today, was your visit to Garma in your first weeks. You've now had the advantage of visiting all throughout Australia. I presume you've had a chance to consult with and talk with First Nations communities here. Would you want to share with us some of the lessons you've learned or observations you've had as you've traveled around Australia and had a chance to meet with the communities?
Well, I still have a lot. Australia's really big, so I still have a lot of places to go. And so I would say that my education is just very much beginning. But I think going to Garma so soon after I arrived here in Australia really was a very meaningful experience for me personally and my husband, but also framed my entire tenure here, because I felt like I was starting, sort of had the chance to kind of go back to the beginning and then begin. And so I think that the people that I met there are so committed to providing the kind of education and training for the students. I visited a school which has the elders in the classroom that are teaching in both languages, and the students are now been selected to go to compete in a robotics competition in the US, which is really fantastic. And then also to visit the Arts Center up there and to see really the sort of one of the kind of really iconic works of art that's hanging in the chapel there, and go down to the ocean, because at Garma is really the festival is held sort of on a meeting ground, and I didn't realize how close it was to the ocean, and then to see the kind of connection between the sea and the land. And then it was also the place where they launched space NASA rocket, so I think it really brought it all together for me. And then the Prime Minister was there with his historic announcement on the constitutional referendum, so I felt like it was really a kind of a past and present, future-oriented visit, which I felt really fortunate to have experienced.
Beautiful, thank you. Secretary Haaland, I mean, your presence here alone is part of the question I'm asking, but obviously, as you mentioned in your remarks, there are as many peoples and many cultures as there are tribes. You have a particular purview over the many tribes and tribal lands in the United States, but your role as Secretary of the Interior is taking you internationally. The issues you work on, climate change, you gave a heavy focus on in your remarks, is obviously of great interest in Australia. It's great interest in the United States. It is of particular interest in the islands of the Pacific. I'm wondering if there are some commonalities or collaboration or particular threads that you're finding as you, given your particular historic role, are finding as you find Indigenous or First Nations peoples in other countries where there are common points or areas of cooperation or ties between them on the issues that you're working on.
Yes, absolutely, and especially because the United States is a Pacific country, a Pacific Ocean country, we've had like these long-standing ties between our countries, these islands, and it's up to us to make sure that we are. I mean, look, as I mentioned in my remarks, this is up to all of us. We're not just going to leave this issue to to one person or one country. We have to act globally together. And as you mentioned, we're all connected, right? We can get online and see what, if I'm back in the United States, I can see what you're doing all the way over here in Australia in a blink of an eye. So we use that technology to connect about the things that matter to us. There is nothing more that I would love to see than Indigenous people from Australia and Indigenous people from the United States getting together and talking about these issues, talking about the lands that are important to them and how we go about protecting those lands. In the United States, we made a lot of really bad ecological decisions because we didn't consult with tribes. We had the Dust Bowl that some of you may have known about. It was, they plowed up the Great Plains, killed off the buffalo to try to get rid of the indigenous people, when all they had to do was ask the indigenous people to give lessons on how you would steward that land. It took decades to come to terms with that, with those decisions. And so, we learned that if we get together and talk about these things, all of us stand to learn something that we didn't know. So I think that when you're talking to people who have learned things from generations and generations and generations ago, that knowledge being passed down, it's tested, right? That knowledge has been tested time and again, and we can rely on it. And we use Indigenous knowledge so much in the work we do. I was up in Northern California at the Redwood National and State Parks, and the tribe came, and they actually had this. They were having this conversation about how this effort went to preserve these streams, giving fish shaded areas where they could swim, where it kept the water cool, right? Having trees that went across the streams and rivers to give fish shelter. Understanding how these systems work and doing your part to remedy the past infractions we've had certainly are a testament to how we can move forward. Yesterday in Kings Park, we were talking about this. There was this tree there that had died, and they said, the practice was to cut these trees down, but now we realize that we should leave these dead trees standing because birds will make their nests in these trees. So right, we don't, we as humans we don't always have the right answers, but we need to seek out those answers from people who know and understand what those answers are. There's a lot of things that we don't know, but collaborating and talking to one another, and certainly getting input from folks who have been handed down knowledge about our lands for millennia will help all of us. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited to bring those issues to the forefront. I'm really honored to be the first Indigenous person in a president's cabinet in the United States, because that means that President Biden, who is leading us all and has been, the work that he has done just in his first couple of years has really been phenomenal. He's putting climate change front and center, and making sure that Indigenous knowledge is also front and center. So I think we're in a good space. This is a new era for Indigenous people around the world, And all of us have to embrace that.
Let me say I've been very impressed by the caliber of the questions that are submitted by you in the audience as you prepared to come to this event and the thought you put into it. I might wrap up. We've got time for maybe one final question. One that's a little bit more difficult, but I think really important for us learning and obviously the United States. One of the most moving moments for me in your speech is when you talked about the significance of now leading a department which had the responsibility for perpetuating so many of the wrongs that were wrought on your ancestors and on Native Americans more broadly. That would probably be true of many departments, depending on the issue and focus. I wonder, the questioner from our community asked, kind of what bureaucratic difficulties are you facing in your efforts to kind of support Native communities? And then from that, what are the lessons that would be learned, regardless of where you sit in government, and your responsibilities, to be able to kind of reach out, overcome history, overcome bureaucratic difficulties, to fully solicit and give voice to the First Nations people, either here in Australia or the United States.
Right. So the Department of the Interior used to be called the Department, like we have the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and my Assistant Secretary is here with me today, Brian Newland, a former president of his tribe in the Bay Mills community, and very honored for him to lead the Bureau of Indian Affairs, making sure that we are upholding our trust and treaty obligations to our nation's Indian tribes. But the Indian issues used to be housed under the Department of War. And so clearly, that kind of said it all, right? One of the things we started was this boarding school initiative in our department. It's to really bring to light the terrible issues that were affiliated with stealing children away from their communities and sending them to boarding school in our country. Come to find out, after we started working on this, that there is a lot of intergenerational trauma that is connected to that era in our country's history. Boarding schools, there were other assimilation policies that worked to get Native Americans off of their lands and out of their communities and into mainstream America. A lot of my relatives, for example, were raised in Long Beach, California, because their grandparents were shipped there to be plumbers and electricians. And my grandfather, he spoke like 5 languages. He was a musician and an artist and an athlete. And I mean, now if we had someone like that, a kid like that in our midst, we'd make sure he went to an Ivy League school, Harvard or Yale. Back then it was, well, you can learn how to work on diesel trains, or you can learn how to be a plumber or an electrician. It wasn't, they didn't want Native Americans to actually move into these cities and become leaders. They wanted them to just be the workforce. And so I think that the main thing that I think we need to do in our country is to foster some healing. There's a lot of healing that has to happen. And if we can't come to terms with the horrible way that we treated our Indigenous people, there's not a real path forward. And so in traveling around the United States, working on this boarding school initiative, allowing people to come and get on a microphone and talk about their experiences or the experiences of their parents or grandparents, sort of like getting it out into the open, shining light on the issue, it has really, I think, helped a lot of our country to understand what it is that we've done wrong and work to remedy those things, right? I think for any country to have a chance at really moving forward, we all have to heal. It's not just my grandmother who was stolen from her family at 8 years old and taken to boarding school, or my grandfather for that matter. But it's somebody who can't, claim that all of us are being affected by essentially the sins of our past. So I think the healing of a country is difficult, but it's an effort that I think a lot of people can embrace, and because they know that it will just make us better in the end. And I think just being able to understand that history and, wanting to embrace it, make things better, it's going to be good for all of us.
Thank you. It is a great honor to have had a Secretary of the Interior who has responsibility not just for the healing of the land, but as she put at the very end, a tremendous mission for the healing of a country and people as well. Let me particularly acknowledge once again the tremendous leaders we have here from our First Nations community here in Western Australia. Former Minister Ken Wyatt, honored to have you here, as well as the other elders from the lands upon which we meet here. We're grateful to have you with us. I trust, like for me, this wasn't just a normal morning policy speech. I trust this is one of these speeches that will kind of sit with you as you think about it, and we think about the unique challenges that we have here in Western Australia and how in some respects they're not unique. That we have partners in a free and open democratic society like the United States that's wrestling with the same things, and as we wrestle together, we're better for that collaboration. In that regard, I'm greatly honored to have been able to host today Secretary Deb Haaland, Ambassador Caroline Kennedy. I thank all of you for making your time this morning. I'd like to extend particular thanks to my wonderful team at the Perth USAsia Centre, relatively short notice for a beautiful event here. Let me just note very briefly, the embassy and the consulate here, Consul General Sirian Nair has been merciless with the schedule, so they've got a very busy day today. Thank you, Siri. You get applause for merciless. I'm not so sure about that. The delegation is going to take a couple pictures at the back, but they've got to move relatively quickly. And so I appreciate your forbearance as we try to get them on the way to where they need to go. On behalf of the Perth USAsia Centre, thank you all for coming. Thank you for your time. Thank you particularly to Ambassador Kennedy and Secretary Haaland.